Rejoice and be glad, for today the Lord has made. Or in part 4, chapter 33, titled Shipwreck. Festus handed Paul to a centurion named Julius, serving with the imperial or Augustan cohort, whose officers and men traveled throughout the empire on escort and courier duties. Julius commanded a detail of about a dozen soldiers. Paul was the only prisoner of rank permitted to take 2 attendants who were listed as his personal slaves, Aristarchus and Luke the physician. The other prisoners would be convicts on their grim way to make a Roman holiday, fed to the lions, either as lion fodder or at the games, or, if burly enough, for training as gladiators. These would all be chained to timbers below the decks. Paul and his attendants could move about freely, though he must always wear a loose chain as a symbol of his status. In Caesarea harbor, Julius found a coastal vessel out of the Adramyttium, east of Assos, in the province of Asia, about to sail home with Levantine cargo. He took passage confident of finding a vessel for Rome at one of the ports where the coaster could call. If she sailed so slowly that the season grew late, he could cross the Adramyttium to Nepal near Philippi and conduct the party by land, then over the Adriatic to Brindisi. Either way, he expected to have them in Rome by the end of October. They sailed from Caesarea in the last week of August 59, before a light waterly breeze, and put in for a day at Sidon, 67 miles northeast. Julius led Paul ashore, thus immediately showing a kindness that was more than the respect to be accorded an unconvicted Roman citizen. Like other military men, Julius had fallen quickly under Paul's charm and air of authority. The Christians of Sidon gave Paul, and probably Luke, and Aristarchus warm hospitality, and fitted them out with any remaining needs for the long voyage. The westerly and the prevailing wind of late summer in the eastern Mediterranean proved a crossing of the open sea south of Cyprus, the direct route that Luke remembered from the reverse voyage 2 years previously. They had to keep between Cyprus and the Cilician shore. Once more Paul saw the Taurus range, blue in the distance beyond the plain where he had lived as a boy. When the mountains came closer to the sea, the vessel hugged the coast, using the offshore breezes and the west-flowing current, and heaving to each evening. Luke noted it all. He was not a seaman, but describes his observation in landlubber's language so accurately that when, in the mid-19th century, a Scot with a yacht and great knowledge of seamanship, James Smith of Jordan Hill, retraced Paul's route, he found that Luke's entire account of his most famous voyage, with its disastrous ends, fitted exactly the facts of wind, sea, and coast. Tacking along the southern Anatolia shore was slow, hot work. For 15 days Paul and his friends never put in to a harbor. Calm and pleasant Mediterranean weather meant heat and misery for the chained-up convicts below. Impatience for the soldiers cooped up in this small ship among the sacks of dried fruit, which probably made most of the cargo. Julius had plenty of opportunity for getting to know his chief prisoner. If conversion followed, Luke was too discreet to mention it, but Julius' subsequent actions point towards the probability. They crossed the Gulf of Attalia, into which Paul had sailed with Barnabas on the first pioneering journey long ago. The rough hills of Lycia lay ahead. The weather could be changeable by now in mid-September, with the mountains disappearing into cloud and lowland, where it narrowed to a point, etched against clearer evening skies to the west. Paul had never penetrated these mountains, but the faith may have been spreading already into valleys from the missionary churches to the north and east. When at last the ship put into a great landlocked harbor of Myra, 2 miles from the city of the mouth of the great gorge, a church could have already been there. Myra, which now is deserted, grew into an important bishopric, whereby peculiar contortion of history folklore Saint Nicholas of Myra became Santa Claus. To read that at in Christmas time, right? Okay. In the bay, among the naval galleys propelled by slave power and the coastal shipping, Julius found a fine, large merchantman of the Egyptian corn run. The lifeline of Rome, importing wheat under the system of privately owned vessels commissioned into the imperial service. Myra, due north of Alexandria, was principal port of call in summer, when the wind did not allow sailing direct to Rome. Julius transferred his soldiers and prisoners. No other military officers was aboard, and this by Roman practice in the corn fleet he took precedence over the captain and the owner of the supercargo. In any emergency, Julius would have the last word. His party increased the complement of the ship to 276 souls. Italian and Egyptian merchants, even an Indian or a Chinese, possibly a string of African slaves from Upper Nile. Army veterans were returning on retirements, priests of Isis, entertainers, scholars from the University of Alexandria, together with women and children. With all these and a big cargo of wheat, Alexandria's ship must have been over 500 tons. By no means the biggest known to have been afloat at the period, no smaller than any merchantman that plied the Mediterranean at the time of Nelson and the last age of sail. Paul, however, differed from the 19th century vessels in several vital respects. She only had one large mast, carrying a huge mainsail, thus putting heavy strains on her timbers. Her stem and stern both looked like a modern bow. She steered by detachable rudders, rather like large paddles, and her captain had no compass or chronometer and only the roughest of charts, so he never knew his position unless he could see sun or stars to take a bearing, which he did by primitive form of quadrant. The ship's intended course on leaving Myra was to sail past roads through the archipelagos, then by the southern tip of Greece, now Cape Metapan, to reach Italy by the Strait of Messina, there we go, and so to Ostia, the port of Rome. But when the vessel tacked out of Myra Bay, the wind was still unfavorable northward and strong. The captain had to work up above Rhodes near the mainland and its proprieties to get smooth water and the shore breezes. We sailed slowly for a number of days, recorded Luke, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the spacious port at the very end of a narrow mountainous peninsula, the westernmost of southern Anatoliana coastline. Serenus was the last point where they had protection from the full strength of the contrary wind, and the wind did not allow us to go on. The captain would not enter harbor. Cnidus had plenty of anchorage, but ran southwest through the Candies toward the mountains of Crete. He rounded Cape Salome and began to sail under the south of Crete, hoping that the wind would veer before he must turn north. And so we struggled along the course until we came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lassie. They had reached a roadstead, well sheltered by the mountains and by islands, which as far as they could sail into the northwest wind. Immediately beyond Fair Havens lies Cape Matala, where the rocky coast turns sharply north for some 20 miles before running west again. And if they tried to cross that open gulf, they would be wrecked on a lee shore. The captain anchored windbound. Days passed. Fair Havens was pleasant enough, but had no port. Small parties would go ashore to visit Lassie, but entire ship's company would need to live aboard if they wintered. October 5th came and went. The Jewish Day of Atonement, the year AD 59. The dangerous days, when navigation was risky but still feasible, were slipping away. With November 11, all navigation would cease on open sea, because then the sun and stars might be overcast for days. With no opportunity for bearings, this rather than the inevitable hazard of storms was a factor that stopped sea traffic in winter. They had lost all prospect of reaching Italy that season. Julius convened a conference to decide the best plan, invited Paul to attend. By now Julius appreciated Paul's judgment as well as his seafaring experience. Captain urged that they seize the first opportunity to round Cape Matala and reach the port of Phoenix, not far down the coast. Probably he feared disaffection in passengers and crew if they wintered in isolated Fair Havens, which had the traditional disadvantage as an anchorage of being open to nearly half the compass, so that in heavy gales the vessel might drag her anchors and go aground. If the wind changed to the north, they could make Phoenix. He was a skilled seaman, and his future actions show, and would know that during autumn in these seas a south wind will often be followed by a violent northeaster, a levanter. His professional advice was to risk it. The owner backed him, for while the ship lay in Fair Havens, he was responsible for keeping the company from starvation, while at Phoenix the passengers would disembark. Julius turned to Paul. Paul gave them his advice. I can see, gentlemen, that this voyage will be disastrous. It will mean grave loss, not only of ship and cargo, but also of life. Julius decided in favor of the captain and the owner. About October 10th, the captain noted that the wind had changed. Luke disassociated himself with the captain's reaction as if thoroughly disappointed. When the south blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close on shore. They turned the cape and began merrily across the gulf, the dinghy bobbing behind as the customary onshore runs inshore. If the sun shone on them, the clouds were ominous, thick on Mount Ida, the highest points of Crete, and now full on their starboard bow. Suddenly the wind changed. A tremendous blast roared down from Ida, striking them full force. Luke called its strength typhonic. The air whirled and twisted. A drenching rain backed out of the coast. Their masts, under full sail, shuddered, and that sudden gale, proving the foolhardiness of the ancients' practice of sailing single-masted, the vibration was so excessive that water began to seep into the hull. Within a few minutes the captain knew he could never keep the ship headed into the northeaster. The levanter was upon them, and they must act accordingly. We had to give way and run for it. to the lee of the small island of Kuda or Gavdos, which lay some 40 miles off the exact path of the wind. They had no hope of making its little port, which was on the wrong side, nor could they dare to anchor, but to use the comparatively smooth water and temporary risky shelter of its cliffs to prepare as best they could for whatever lay ahead. First they secured and hoisted the dinghy, now waterlogged. Passengers helped, and Luke recorded feelingly, "We managed with some difficulty," and then they used tackle to put cables under the hull in order to brace the timbers, a common precaution in ancient times and occasionally in Nelson's day, against the strain of wind and turbulent water. The chief fear of all on board was that the ship would either break up or the timbers leak until she became waterlogged. More ancient ships were lost by foundering than any other cause. They lowered the yard with its mainsail, for if she ran with this wind under full sail, the end is she did not founder first, would be the shallows, the quicksands of the North African shore, the notorious Gulf of Sirtis Major off Libya. Their one hope was to set storm sails, lay her on our starboard track, with right side to the wind, and let her drift slowly to ride out the storm. Leaving the shelter of Kuda, they were soon enduring the full agony of rough seas. Without much weight of sail, we were violently storm-tossed, bobbing like a cork with the spray rain, preventing fires and drenching supplies, clothes, and everything above and below deck. What little was eaten would be thrown up by wrenching stomachs. The heaving, slippery boards made a movement painful. Paul, Luke, the convicts now released from their irons, and every able-bodied man would make turns at the pumps. When the seeping of water through strained timbers, with the seeping of water through strained timbers, the level in the bilge rose remorselessly, and the ship settled lower. On the second day, to listen to her, the captain ordered loose cargo jettison, all livestock, much else. On the third day he ordered overboard the spare tackle, cables, spars, anything not essential. Day after miserable day, night after terrifying night, they rose and fell in mountain seas, thick unbroken clouds preventing any reckoning. The captain had no idea of this position. To Luke it seemed they were tossing on a crazy course, but in fact they drifted very steadily at a mean rate of 1.5 miles an hour in a direction about 8 degrees north of west. Had they possessed charge and the means to make dead reckoning, they would have spared themselves much worry, for they could not have set a more dangerous course, provided they did not founder. The main cargo of wheat had become thoroughly waterlogged, the sacks too heavy and sodden to move in a pitching ship, and all the time increasing in weight. The water level rose and the ship settled lower, until by the 11th or 12th day of the storm, all hope of our being saved was abandoned. Foundering was inevitable now. A matter of a few days at most, even if the storm abated. It would mean the loss of all hands if they abandoned ship. Little is known of the interior designs of the ancient ships, but all passengers would have been very much on top of one another, sharing their miseries without the slightest privacy. Yet Luke had not seen what Paul saw, until the morning when Paul struggled forward to where the captain and many of the crew huddled dejected. Paul threw his voice above the wind, and they gathered round him. His first words were a chip of the old Paul with his tendency to justify himself, but his hearers expected him to notice. "Men," he said, "you have been listening. You should have listened to me, and not have sailed from Crete. Then we should have avoided all this damage and loss. But now I beg you, take courage. Not one of you will lose his life. Only the ship will be lost. For last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I worship, stood by me, and he said, do not be afraid. You must stand before Caesar. And look, God has given you the lives of all who sail with you. And so, men, take courage, for I believe God that it will be just as I was told, but we must be east of some island. On the 14th night since they had left Crete, with no decline of the gale, the sailors suddenly detected the sound of breakers looming leeward. They could see nothing, but if they could hear above the storm, they must be drifting close to a rocky shore. They took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little later found 15. At this rate they would soon be shipwrecked on the rocks. They could see the breakers now, but not the shore, for they were in fact off the low point of Jura, at the opening of what now is St. Paul's Bay. Smith of Jonenhill discovered that this was the exact exact spot a drifting ship would have reached on the 14th night, and that soundings were accurate too. The captain ordered no less than 4 anchors to be removed aft from their usual place forward, and dropped through the alternative stern holes with ancient ships, unlike modern, were fitted. By this seaman-like action, the ship would be prevented from falling on the rocks at night, and better positioned to run on shore when daylight allowed a choice. Then they wished for day. There was nothing else to do. The sailors thought otherwise. Paul, alert, spotted what they were up to. Men on whose skills the safety of officers and passengers depended were quietly lowering the dinghy under pretense of dropping anchors from the bow. Determined to sneak away before the ship broke up, Paul said to the centurion and soldiers, unless these men stay in ship, you cannot be saved. The soldiers cut the rope and the belt, and the boat fell into the sea and drifted away. Just before dawn made another suggestion. The captain had been far too concerned with the crisis to think of it. Paul addressed the officers and everyone in here. For the last 14 days you have lived in suspense and gone hungry. You have eaten nothing whatsoever, so I beg you to have something to eat. Your lives depend on it. Not a hair of you will be lost, remember. Taking a sodden, moldy loaf, he gave thanks to God, praying in the presence of all. He broke it and deliberately began to eat. They plucked up their courage, and a general meal was organized. The ship's motion being less than for past 14 days, a feeding of 276 persons until all had eaten offered no difficulty. The new strength, they dumped the rest of the wheat into the sea. By now it was daylight. The ship lay at the entrance to a bay. No one recognized it. Not knowing the rate or direction of drift, they might be anywhere. Off Sicily to Tunis, ahead stood a rocky shore, but they could see a sandy beach. The captain carried out a complicated maneuver. The crew, in Luke's description, slipped the anchors and let them go. One at a time, they loosed the lashing, the steering paddles, set the foresails to the wind, and let her drive into the beach. The captain heard her completely under command, and half a mile to go. Soon she would be beached, and they would wade ashore. But he could not realize he gave the order that the rocky spit of land close on their starboard beam was in fact a little island, Salmonetta, linked to the mainland by a shoal, a place where 2 seas meet. as Luke described it. Because of this, the vessel was caught in a cross-current and swept into the shoal until the fore part struck fast in a bottom of mud and clay, while the breakers began to pound the stern to pieces. The company began jumping out. The soldiers reacted instantly in fear. Convicted felons or Paul might try to swim off and escape. According to standing orders, they sought leave to slaughter the lot. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass, they all escaped, all safe to land. Whew! They should have listened to Paul. 33. Chapter. All the body of Jesus Christ. I pray that the Spirit of God is with Paul, that the Spirit of this reading of this glorifies and edifies the body listening. Shalom. May the peace be with you when reading this word. Amen.